Well, well, well. The bomber is calling out the haymaker. I'm Teekosey, and this is with just 15 defeats. It's Teekosey, and this is with just 15 defeats. On today's show, we're going to be discussing David Haye versus Tony Bellew, and we're going to be discussing the factors of the fight and also my prediction. So thanks for joining me on this video. I really appreciate it. If you've got any comments about this potential matchup, leave your comments below. Give us a thumbs up in the bottom right hand corner, and also in the top right hand corner we're going to be having a little poll pop up. You'll see a little I button pop up in the screen. Just click yes or no. Simple as that. Be great to hear your opinion and feedback. So, David Haye, Tony Bellew. Yeah, this has come about in the last couple of days following Bellew's cruiserweight world title victory on the weekend, where he won in a couple of rounds, knocking out his opponent. Pretty devastating KO, pretty damn impressive, particularly when you consider that he came back from being knocked down himself. Quite a substantial knockdown, but he took it pretty well. And we've seen throughout Tony's career that he's been able to be knocked down and get up. Even in the fight where he was knocked out, he was dropped, he came back, and so he's got a serious chin. So it was a pretty impressive matchup. But after the fight, in the post-match in-ring interview, he called out David Haye. He didn't actually name him. Bit of disrespect in the ring there, which was quite interesting, but we all knew who he was calling out. Now, I think it's possibly unlikely this fight is going to happen, but it could happen if the money makes sense. Okay, and I think it is a fight that will grab the imagination of the public, and therefore, cha-ching, is a potential money spinner, right? So let's just talk about the interesting factors of this fight. The first interesting factor of this potential matchup is the size differential. Now, a lot of people say David Haye campaigned as a cruiserweight for most of his career, and he's actually a small heavyweight. Both completely true. Even when he challenged Klitschko in the unification fight, he came in at only 210 pounds. 210 pounds. Now, we know that most heavyweights in the modern era will come in, weigh in approximately somewhere between 230 and 255. That's what most guys seem to come in this day and age, and that's because we're in the super heavyweight era, the era of guys that are 6 foot and above, that have huge frames, and therefore there's a lot more muscle, a lot more mass on that frame. And obviously we all know that when we go back in time, go back through the decades, around about the 200-pound mark was about the average for heavyweight. So it has significantly changed in this modern era in the last 10 to 15 years. And David Haye is a small heavyweight. But in his last two fights, he's come in weighing in about 225. Now, what I would say about that is, I believe in these last two fights, he hasn't taken them seriously. Right, that's the first thing. The second thing is he knew they were significantly weaker opponents, and he knew that he would be able to knock them out in a couple of rounds. So he's come in carrying a little bit more timber, around about the 225 mark, probably about his natural weight that he walks around in day to day when not in fight camps, right? Because I've heard a lot of stories and rumours that he used to cut weight quite a bit, even as a heavyweight. He wanted to be trim, light, agile, and he wanted to have that weight differential. So in his mind, it gave him a speed advantage, which may be true, maybe not. I know some people I've spoken to have criticised some of the methods that David Haye adopted in camps to kind of maintain his weight. And now he's kind of under a different regime with McGuigan. Things are maybe slightly different, and it's possible that we're going to see a slightly bigger Haye. I actually think that it might be beneficial for Haye to even put on a few more pounds in the heavyweight division and breach that 230 mark, because he's still going to have the speed. He's still an agile guy, fantastic movement that he's always had, right? So where the weight issue becomes a factor in this fight is when we start talking about Tony Bellew. Now, he's campaigned up until the last couple of years at light heavyweight, right? So he was campaigning around the 175, 180 mark for majority of his career, and he was in relatively decent shape. But then he obviously lost his big fight, and he used the excuse that he was cutting weight and all this sort of nonsense, and that was the reason why he got sparked out. So then he jumped up to cruiserweight, and we saw his body shape started to change, and it became less defined. Significantly less defined, and he became what a lot of people would say, he became a bit fleshy. That's not always necessarily a bad thing. Now, I know that I've been criticised on this channel for discussing the fleshiness of some heavyweights, right? And that is how it is. But when you get down to the weights lower down, right, where fighters need to meet weight, it's very unusual for there to be a fleshy fighter. Very unusual, unless they have serious lack of discipline and motivation, and then they end up fighting people that they're not on an even keel. They're not an even keel. The fact that we have this weight cutting culture, everyone really needs to adopt it. If you don't, you're going to end up fighting bigger guys because of it, and it's as simple as that. So Tony, he has this he was never a really ripped guy. Like some guys, I'm not saying you have to be ripped. You definitely do not need to be ripped. He was never ripped, but he was always in good shape. And then since he's gone up to cruiserweight, he's obviously piled on those extra 15 pounds or whatever, and he has become a fleshier fighter. Now, if you compare the two fighters, Haye and Tony Bellew, they're about the same height. So you could say that they've got a similar frame, and it isn't really an issue. Now, firstly, Haye's got a much bigger reach. And he's just generally a much bigger guy. The whole shape of his body is significantly bigger. And I think if these two guys were to get in the ring together, there would be a significant, even if they kind of, in theory, they came to the same weight, just say they were fighting at cruiserweight, I think there would be a significant size differential. It would be visible. That's what I believe. You just got to go back to when David Haye was a cruiserweight. He was a massive cruiserweight. You look at that fight against Enzo McAnally. Wow, the differential between those two guys was ridiculous. And I know that there's been stories about Enzo kind of filling his pockets with stuff to kind of bulk. So when he got weighed, he kind of reached certain weights. But the size differential between Haye and Enzo McAnally on that fight was phenomenal. And if you ain't seen it, check it out. You'd never believe these two guys are fighting in the same weight class. It's worth it, and it's a fantastic. It's one of David Haye's best finishes, in my opinion. Now we have seen guys move up to heavyweight from cruiserweight and below in recent years. We've seen people like Tarver, Cunningham, a few other guys. Adamic has kind of jumped through the weights, but they've kind of held it. Those three guys, even at heavyweight, they kind of they were in good shape. They looked pumped. They looked decent. I don't think if Tony Bellew came up to heavyweight, I can see him probably fighting, coming in at about 215, and he would be quite fleshy. And another guy you can talk about who jumped through the weights at the heavyweight, Roy Jones Jr. Now you look at that fight. You look at that fight, right, and he's in phenomenal shape. Admittedly, he's sub 200 pounds, but he's still jumped up 20 odd pounds, and he probably came in his the weight he would come in if he wasn't cutting weight. So these are the factors you need to think about. Tony Bellew will probably have to put on weight. He's not fighting his normal weight. He's not cutting. See, this is the difference, I think, with Tony, is that he's now not cutting weight, so he's able to be a bit more freer with what he does, his training, he's eating, all that sort of business. So he comes in at around about the 200 mark, which some guys like, some doesn't always work for everyone. So I think I think there's going to be a size differential wherever it happens. I cannot see Haye going down to cruiserweight. And the reason why I can't see that is because I reckon that Haye will end up. He wants to fight Anthony Joshua, so I don't believe he's going to risk that by cutting such a significant weight at this time in his career. And considering the last time he fought a cruiserweight was 8 years ago, so for the last 8 years he's been injured for a portion of that time, but for the last 8 years he's been campaigning at heavier weights, and he's been managing his weight to a certain level. So I can't see that happening. Now, the second factor in this fight is actually Tony Bellew's defence, which is terrible. Real terrible. It's versus for a guy that is a current world champion. He's got phenomenally poor defence. I've always thought that. Through all the fights that I've watched of Tony's. He's very open. Now, he fights with his hands around about his chin level, but he gets hit a lot. Which is why he gets dropped fairly. Like, he's been dropped, I don't know, 5 or 6 times in his career, possibly more. I know I've seen him dropped quite a few times, and as we've said, he's managed to get up all but once, which is fairly impressive. So shows that he's got the guts. He's got heart. He has heart. He has guts, and he's got a chin. He seriously has a chin, but he has been dropped on a number of times, and that's an issue. That is an issue when you fight real top level KO punchers. And for my money, I don't think Tony's fought a lot of them. He's fought Stevenson, and we can go into the third factor, which 2 and 3 are kind of related, but the third factor is the Adonis-Stevenson fight. The Adonis-Stevenson fight is probably the number one fight which will help us in assessing Haye versus Bellew. The Adonis-Stevenson fight. So this is when Tony jumped up to fight Stevenson. This was at light heavyweight. This is at light heavyweight, and this was the fight that he lost. He was stopped in 6 rounds in brutal fashion. He was actually dropped, I think, at least once. Then he got up, and he was stopped on his feet. He was actually pretty much knocked out and knocked in on his feet. It's quite a good stoppage. It's a fair stoppage, and really throughout the rest of the fight, Stevenson really got the better of Tony in a lot of the rounds. Of the 6 rounds, he at least got the better of him in at least 4 of those rounds. Now, Tony wasn't completely outboxed. He held his own, and if I'm not mistaken, I think he dropped Adonis as well. I think he dropped Adonis himself. So I think it was a competitive fight. It was a competitive fight, but Stevenson, he was just that little bit too quick. His movement was good, and he obviously got the stoppage. Now, Bellew, he did box reasonably well in that fight. And that's one thing, actually, this is one thing I wanted to say, was that over his career, he's got a bit of a bad rap, actually. And he's been knocked for not necessarily having the best boxing skills. Now, he can box. There's no two ways about it. He's won numerous amateur titles. And he went through, and I know in the run-up to the Nathan Cleverly won fight, Tony was getting a lot of grief, a lot of hate due to his boxing skills, and a lot of pundits were out there and they were saying, "Look, Cleverly's going to win this. Cleverly's going to win this. It's going to be comprehensive boxing masterclass." But Tony's got a puncher's chance, and that's so disrespectful. It's so disrespectful because it's just basically saying this is a mismatch, but he's got the chance of, against the odds, getting a KO. But I've always thought that he's got a decent amount of skill behind him. He can box behind the jab relatively well. It's not a bad jab, and obviously he's got that equaliser in the KO. So he's a decent guy. Now, the next factor is the CVs that the two guys are bringing. I don't think Tony's CV is that impressive at all. I don't think it's impressive at all. There isn't really anyone of any note on that. No offence to the lad, but there isn't really anyone of any note. There's decent guys. But there's no standout opponents. Like, obviously Stevenson, but he lost that in brutal fashion. And the rest, like the guy I just fought this week, Nathan Cleverly, Chilemba, they're all right. But they're not amazing. Now, David Haye's CV is slightly more impressive, but again, I've actually been somewhat critical of Haye's CV in the past. Obviously, he got those 2 phenomenal cruiserweight world title fights where he basically polished off the top guys and became a unified champion. So incredibly impressive. He then fought Wladimir, which was it is what it is. It is what it is. Okay, the guy that only lost like once before. I know he hadn't. Again, Wladimir's CV wasn't particularly impressive himself, but he was a current belt holder, and Haye kind of. I think a lot of people didn't think Haye could pull it off. They thought the size differential would be too much, but he did do it. And then the rest of his CVs, yeah, it is what it is. He's fought Klitschko and lost and whatever. But over the course of his career, it's not a phenomenal CV, but there is that. I'd say the difference is that I think David Haye's been involved in bigger fights. It's as simple as that. Right? So the next factor of this fight, which is probably the most crucial element of it, the money. The money in this fight. Now, what I found quite interesting was that when Tony Bellew called out David Haye, he made fun of the fact that David Haye was fighting on Dave. The fact that David Haye was fighting on Dave, joke channel, all that sort of business. Now, the facts, what it came in that David Haye had earned $1 million just for that fight, fighting a no one. You earned $1 million, and there was 4 million viewers. Now, I don't know what Tony earned in that fight at Goodison Park, but I'll be pretty sure that they didn't get 4 million viewers. They did not get 4 million viewers, and obviously, yeah, it was on kind of a paid channel, but that's the difference. Haye's bringing a lot more popularity. He is a celebrity, and for that respect, I think he holds more cards. Now, not only that, the unfortunate situation with Tony Bellew is that he's fighting at cruiserweight. It's not a money division. It's not a glamour division, and the fights out there, they aren't out there. It's as simple as that. The fights for Tony Bellew aren't there. Now, there's a number of guys in the cruiserweight division that aren't too bad. But they're not world names. They're not money fights. There's a lot of Eastern European, Russian guys, and they're unlikely to want to come to England. And if they do, the money factor kind of, I think, changes. It's not Tony would get much more money if he was prepared to go to Russia. He's come out and he said there's no way is he going to fight in Russia, which is, I think, in the current climate, is a fair thing to do, because we don't know what's happening in those sort of fights, and we want it to be an even playing field, right? And all these stories that are coming out, the drugs tests that are happening, it does not look good for fights being staged in Russia. So the fact that he doesn't have any money fights. He has decent fights at cruiserweight. There's no money fights. He was in the light heavyweight division, and there's a lot of money fights. There's a lot of money fights in the light heavyweight division, because there's stars. There are stars in that division. Let me just quickly look. So you've obviously got Stevenson, you've got Pulev, Ward, Pascal, Chavez Jr. Like, there's decent guys that have got massive followings stateside, right? And that's the difference here. That's the difference. Cruiserweight, the guys that are in cruiserweight, that relatively decent, they're the Eastern European segment, and the money isn't going to be here in the UK, or the money isn't going to be there in America. So for me, David Haye holds all the cards. He holds all the cards in making this fight happen, and the money is going to be on his side. So that's why I think it may happen, it may not, because he doesn't need. David Haye, unbelievably, doesn't need this fight. He made £1 million fighting Jajai a couple of weeks ago. Very easy work. He could do that. If he fights Shannon Briggs, whenever that's going to be, September, it's going to be another easy night's work. I think he'll comprehensively beat Briggs, and he'll earn probably more than $1 million. He might earn a couple of million. And you've got to think, now, is he going to earn that jumping across to Sky to fight Tony Bellew? He might do. Might not. And the risk is higher, because it suddenly becomes a big fight. A lot more pressure and all that entails. So it does become an interesting a matchup in that respect. But as I say, I think Haye holds all the cards in whether that happens. And as I've said previously, I think Haye wants to build towards the Anthony Joshua fight. And I think that Eddie Hearn, he wants to be in control. He wants to be in control, and it might be the case that he does not want to put Joshua in with David Haye. He wants to put it on his own terms, and from having the power, he may try and force Haye into this Bellew fight, with the view to fighting Joshua down the road. But as I've said, I don't think it's a good warm up for the Joshua. I don't think it's a good warm up. And I would advise Haye against it. But the fact is, as just going back to the money, if he fights Tony Bellew, if he fights Shannon Briggs, easy money. He could then fight Tony Bellew, and the money will be there. The money will be there because they'll both run their mouths. They will run their mouths big time, and it will make money. So there you go. So now we move on to the prediction of this actual matchup: David Haye versus Tony Bellew. My prediction is it's a stoppage win for David Haye. I think it's a stoppage win within 6 rounds. I think Tony's gonna be too slow. His defense is gonna be too poor, and David's gonna land a lot of punches. When he wants to land punches, he's going to move around the ring relatively quickly. And Tony, as Tony's moved up the weights, since he's been a cruiserweight, he has become a plodder. His style has changed to be more of a plodder. And going back to that whole defensive situation, he's got such confidence in his own power, and that's part of the reason why his defense is so poor. He has that confidence in his own power that he can take some time punishment, but if he lands, he's gonna be able to knock out his opponent. So basically, that's what I think. I think within 6 rounds, David Haye will have enough skill, agility, power, and skill to be able to finish off Tony Bellew. And I don't think it will happen at cruiserweight, so it won't be for like a cruiserweight title. But that might be an interesting edge if David Haye was prepared to drop down. So that's what I think about this fight. So if you've got any comments, leave them below. I really want to hear from you. Take part in the poll, and we'll see you in the next round.